Ready. Today we're going to talk about Mexico and review. Hopefully everybody's got their charts. And we're going to go through the chart starting with the type of constitution and government. And then go through just like we did Great Britain the last time. So first let's start with Constitution of Mexico. Well, where does Mexico's constitution come from?
The revolution.
All right, so their current constitution is the 1917 constitution that comes from the revolution. So 1917 constitution. They are a federal republic. And what kind of system do they have of the choices at the top?
President.
All right, they have a presidential system. Now, a couple of things that you need to remember about their constitution is that it's easily amended. They have over 300 amendments. It takes just a majority of their Congress, and so there are many, many amendments. As far as citizens' rights in the Constitution, voting is compulsory. They have to vote or else they pay a fine. And one of the things that is very essential that has been controversial lately is that all of the subsoil rights are governmental controlled. So like oil, that all belongs to the government. And so recently when they said that they were going to release controls of Pemex, and give private firms the right to look and explore for oil. This was a major, major change in Mexico. All right, let's go to legitimacy. What legitimizes the Mexican government? Yes.
Patron-client system. They pay people. The president has complete authority because people are scared that they're going to lose their jobs.
So does that give them legitimacy or does that lessen legitimacy?
Well, I don't know. They're like, well, no.
Among some people.
It depends because some people are scared, right? And so they follow into the trends.
Okay, so let's look at our terms. What is legitimacy?
People believe that the government has the right to rule.
All right, the people are giving the people believe that the regime is proper. It has the right to rule. It is the one that should be there. Okay, probably the number one thing that gives legitimacy to the government is the revolution. Everything is associated with the revolution. Political parties, you look at the names of each of the parties, they all have something revolution in them. So they appeal to the revolution because that gives them legitimacy. Other things are pluralism. Gains in pluralism in that the people actually think their vote counts. This is given more legitimacy. And when did this start?
During the 90s, there was that one guy.
When was the first time a non-pre candidate was elected?
2000.
All right, in 2000. So we're talking the current century, the fact that people can go and vote and actually know that their vote counts, that gives legitimacy to those people who are elected. And another big thing is the economy and how the economy has been booming with the advent of the maquiladores and how Mexico has been progressing economically, has said, well, this government is legitimate because of that, or it lends that. What has in Mexico lately tended to lower legitimacy?
Drug wars.
All right, very good. The drug wars, the government's inability to control this lawlessness, and the fact that sometimes the government's involved. I just read the paper this morning that there is a local governor who was caught on tape taking money from drug lords. Well, that's going to delegitimize that state where he was the governor of. Okay, so all of those tend to legitimize Mexican government. And for many years, the PRI was the one who legitimized the government, but after it lost power and it was shown that they were doing all these things by fraud, that didn't help. All right, let's go to the historic past. First of all, colonialism. During the colonial time, you want to note the 3 G's. We went to Mexico for 3 things. People did.
God, glory,
God, glory, and
gold.
gold. So, this gave to them its Catholic nature. It also gave to them the mixture of cultures. When you went to Mexico, you went as a conquistador. There were no women, and so we have the intermixing of the Spanish and the local Amerindians.
Attention students, if you have a car parked out on the driving range, please remove it. Thank you.
And what did this result in?
The mestizos.
All right, the mestizos, which is part of their culture today. Also the fact that they have no self-government. They were there for God, glory, and gold. They weren't there to live and establish a separate colony. They were there for those 3 things. So we're looking at economic dependence, mixing of cultures, Catholicism, and no self-government all come from the colonial times that formed the culture of Mexico. In the 1800s, we have the independence movement. Independence came in the 1810s, and this gave a number of things to Mexican culture. First, it gave them their national identity. They were separate from Spain now. Mexico was their own country. But it also created instability because the leaders of Mexico were all what? They were all generals, and they were all military people. So this created all sorts of issues, especially when we invade Mexico and take half their country. So this is kind of the chaos of the 1800s in Mexico. Trying to bring order from this chaos are our dictators, and we have the last, which is called Porfirio Diaz, and his reign is called the Porfiriato. He brings order, but what happens to Mexico? They lose their freedom. I mean, he runs time after time again. He's stuffing the ballot box. He's doing all these kind of things. So what does that result in? In the early 1900s.
The revolution.
All right, so the next one you want to put is the Mexican Revolution. This goes from 1910 to about 1920. The causes are this dictatorship, the Porfiriato, which they call it. The results, however, are the 1917 Constitution. We have the birth of the PRI, this new party that is given birth by the revolution that will rule Mexico for over 70 years. And we also get from the revolution this patron-client system, which is current even today. This is how the government is staffed, your patron-client system. What do we call their patron-client system? Very good, the Camarilla system. The Camarilla system. Okay, other events, you want to put the Cardenas upheaval of the 1930s. Cardenas is to Mexico as Roosevelt is to the United States. He's the person who introduces greater government control, mostly to bring out of the recession or the depression. And we have big government created by the Cardenas administration. Okay, then we have the economic miracle. Mexico in the 1970s and 80s will have this economic miracle, and then the 90s is the time when you need to remember the reforms. All these reforms to make it more democratic. Okay, so that is some of the historic past that you need to remember. Okay, going over to the next section is geographical division of powers. What do they do in Mexico? And what do we call it?
States. Oh, the states. Oh, that the states, the federal states.
All right, so
30.
that is even in the name of Mexico. It's federalism. So we have 31 states and the federal district. The federal government has dominated this relationship because of the PRI. So for over 70 years, the federal government had more power, and that's because the president is the head of the PRI, and the PRI controlled the states. And the states had little independent power and few resources. Now today it's a little bit better because the PRI doesn't rule. But still we have this federal system set up of 31 states and a federal district and power divided with that. Okay, patron-client system. There are political culture, I mean. 3 things you need to remember. First, the importance of religion. 80% of Mexicans are Catholic, and so their beliefs influence political values, although most of the people are not active. So you got 80% are Catholic, but not all those go to church. Less than 10% go to church on a regular basis. A reaction to that from colonial times where the church had so much power is the anti-clerical movement, which is in their culture. The government is very anti-clerical, which means that they take measures to take the church out of politics. And one of those is they didn't let Catholic priests and officials even vote. So they want to separate church and state and take power away from the church. This is called anti-clerical. Another big thing in their culture is the patron-client system.
Renee Brady, please call 5129. Renee Brady, please call 5129.
Which is called the Camarilla system. And what this does is it lends to corruption. Why? Why does the patron-client system lead to corruption?
Yeah.
What? We didn't hear.
I don't know, it feels kind of inherent. Like if you're giving people stuff for being your friend, I mean, that just
Is
seems
it-
like it's going to be
It's
corrupt.
corruption.
It
Control
just
is
seems
in
like
it.
what corruption is.
Right. And also, if you're giving them positions as friends,
They're not.
what does that say about their competence to do that position?
They're not.
Bad at it.
They're probably not good at it.
All right, so you've got incompetence coupled with what's in it for me. We're doing it because I know you, not because I'm qualified. And both those lend to corruption. Because they'll put their personal interest always before the interest of who? All right, the state or the government. So if you have a policeman pulling somebody over because they are speeding, where does the interest of the government into preventing speeders from speeding as opposed to his own personal interest if they offer him a bribe? Which one will be the best for him?
The bribe.
Take the bribe.
All right, he'll take the bribe.
You know, it's just, I got pulled over yesterday.
Did you bribe the cop?
I was at the stop sign, and then she pulled me over, and her reasoning was, you didn't wait at the stop sign for 3 seconds.
It's not even a
Right, but you gotta realize we're not in Mexico.
I just,
This
I know.
is different.
But I didn't know.
You don't offer the policeman a bribe. Okay.
Not 3 oh.
She
She gave me a ticket for not waiting 3 seconds. I was like,
Okay, bad Mohan. Okay,
Breaking the law.
next item is, in their culture, there's this economic dependency on who?
Oil. No.
On the United States.
That kind of thing.
And so this is a kind of a inferiority complex in that the United States will come in and do something. It was Spain at first, and the United States today. They're under the shadow of a more powerful country. And they are struggling for independence from economic controls and political controls. Because anytime we had a problem with something in Mexico, we'd go invade them. Or we'd send troops or whatever. And so this is an issue in their culture that is something that lingers. All right, let's go to the executive branch. Who's the leader of the executive branch?
The president.
All right, we got the president. How long's his term?
6 years.
Okay, what do we call that? Sexennial. The president has formal powers that are similar to the United States president. Like chief executive, he is the chief legislator. But is the president of Mexico more powerful than the president of the United States?
Yes.
Yes. Why? Because of his informal powers. What
yes.
informal powers does he have that makes him so powerful in his country?
He controls the courts.
Through what?
The patron-client system.
Very good. So he controls this patron-client system. And through that, he can control the courts, he can control the Congress. And for most of Mexico's history, the Congress has been a rubber stamp for the president. Now, not so much anymore because the PRI does not control Mexico. However, the current president is a member of the PRI, but he's doing a different type of PRI rule,
Yay.
not quite so dominating.
I forget. Who's the current president? Isn't it
Oh, Pineda.
Pinto?
What limits the power of the president? Are there any limits?
Is his term limit?
All right, very good. He's limited to 1 6-year term, and no matter what he does, by tradition, he will not go beyond that. He's also limited by implementation. If he wants the bureaucracy to implement something that he has done, can he just have it carried out? Not very easily, especially if they're incompetent to do so, and if they put their own personal interest over the interest of the state. So implementation issues are also limiting his power, and also sovereignty in foreign affairs. If the United States gets involved, I mean, we just go down there and do something. He also has to worry about that if he does something outlandish. So Mexico has those limits, even though he does have great powers, the president. Okay, let's go over to the legislative branch. Okay, the first part we'll put the Chamber of Deputies, and then the second half we'll put the Senate. Okay, Chamber of Deputies. What is the term of the Chamber of Deputies?
It's 2 years. 2 years?
3.
Oh, okay.
So they're 3-year terms. How many Chamber of Deputies members are there? 500. Okay, how are they elected?
Single member districts.
All right, they have mixed system. So 300 are elected by single member districts, and 200 of them are elected by proportional representation. So they have a two-ballot system. You vote for your single-member district person and you vote for your party. And the 300 are single-member districts, the 200 are by proportional. There is also no consecutive terms. In other words, you serve one term in the House of Chamber of Deputies, and then you must go serve a term in the Senate or somewhere else, because there's no two consecutive terms. Now, I've heard that they're letting up on that in state houses, but we'll see. All right, the other branch is what? What do they call their other branch of Congress?
Senate.
All right, the Senate. What's the term of a senator?
6 years.
6 years, same as ours.
Yeah.
6 years, very same as ours. Now, there are 128 senators. Each state gets 4. Three are elected by single-member districts, and one's elected by proportional representation. So they even have a mixture in the Senate. Okay. They have equal powers with the Chamber of Deputies, just like the United States Senate. And why is the president dominated the legislative branch? For most of the time?
Because they were the same party, not the head of that party.
All right, he's the head of the party. He's the head of the PRE. He's the head of the patron-client system. Now, one other thing you can put for the president's domination is that the Congress has limited sessions, like Utah. They're only in session a part of the year, and then their session dies. And then the president can rule without them. And also the fact that they have non-consecutive terms, that means that there can't be senators and Chamber of Deputy people who have long tenure, because you have to move from one to the other and you can't develop a lot of seniority, and therefore the president can dominate more. But remember, the president can only be president for 6 years. So, but you can only be a representative for 3 years and a senator for 6 years. Then you have to rotate because you can't serve consecutive terms. And that has helped the president to dominate the legislative branch. Okay, next side. Let's look at the judicial branch. And you can put on this, it is like the US in that they have a federal system. And so they have state courts, they have national courts, they have appeals courts, and it's just like the United States system. The highest court is the Supreme Court. That has judicial review on paper, but it is rarely or seldom used. And the question is, why is it not used? What can the president do if the courts declared any of his actions unconstitutional?
Fire. Or override
Yeah,
it.
he could ignore it. And what is the check on the president if he ignores a ruling of the Supreme Court?
Yeah.
He could be impeached. But does he control the Congress? Yes, Congress is usually a rubber stamp, or has been, and so Congress would not impeach him. So the president can ignore it. The president can do all of those things with the courts. Now, is the court going to rule an action of the president unconstitutional and be able to enforce that if Congress is not with him? No. So that is why the courts are very weak and have been dominated by the president. And the big issue is the implementation. The courts cannot implement their rulings without the president agreeing. So, rule of law problems result. The president can be above the law and has been for most of Mexican history, although we are seeing changes in that. Okay, let's move to bureaucracy. In the bureaucracy, it is large, and it's dominated by these large government-owned businesses we call what?
Parastatals.
Very good. Parastatals. Parastatals. The largest and most famous of all these is Pemex. Petroleum Mexico, which is the national oil company. The bureaucracy is dominated by the president because he has the spoils system. He's also the head of the Camarilla. The problems with their bureaucracy are 2, competence. They're not professional. They're there because they know somebody. There's too much turnover. They're paid little, so therefore they're corrupt. And the other problem is their failure to implement. They will always take bribes if it's contrary to their personal interest to enforce the law. So, competence, implementation are both problems with the Mexican bureaucracy. Okay, let's go to parties. We have 3 main parties. The first is the PRI. Where's the PRI on the ideological scale?
Kind of like the whole thing.
Right. It is co-optive. It covers the whole middle. And if they find leadership that they like, they will go after that person and make him a deal they can't refuse. And this is the normal way of expanding their leadership. They will co-opt leaders, they will co-opt interest groups, anything to make them more inclusive. Okay? Who is the current leader of the PRI? And who's the president of Mexico?
Who?
Peña Nieto. Okay? And so that is the current leader. He is back in power, the PRI. Okay, what about the PAN? Where does that go on the political spectrum?
They're to the right.
All right, it is on the right. Center-right. The previous 2 presidents were both PAN presidents. Vicente Fox was the first PAN president. And then the last one was Mr. Calderon. And both of those were PAN presidents. Where is the PAN the most popular? Where does it? All right, in the north, by the border. That's where it has most of its support. They want less government, and they like and support the Catholic Church. They're not so much anti-clerical as the PRI, but they are liking the Catholic Church. Okay, then we have the PRD. Where's the PRD on the political spectrum?
Left.
All right, they're on the left, center left. Where is their support coming from? the South, the poorer areas. Large cities, where you have urban poor. But this is where they get their main thing. Their leader right now is Obrador, and he ran for president twice. Another candidate was Cardenas's son, who is the Roosevelt of the 30s. His son was also a big person in the PRD. All right, let's go to interest groups. The big word in interest groups is corporatism. What are we talking about here?
So the government controls the interest groups.
All right, so meet demands with accommodation, we co-opt, whatever we need to do. We give limited input. What is the big labor interest group? The CTM, Confederation of Trabajo, or Workers of Mexico. Andreas, what would that be?
What?
What would you say? Confederation, what's workers,
Oh, trabajadores.
yeah, of Mexico, so that's why they call it the CTM.
Oh, like, that was too hard for yeah. The confession.
Okay. So that's the big labor group. The big business group is the CN. These are the business elites not in the pre. All right, let's go to elections. Elections, we have elections for president. And let me just review our rundown on that. We have the pre, which is the less educated, elderly, small town, and rural, but yet co-opting other groups into their group. We have the pan, which is north, middle class, business, urban, better educated. And we have the PRD, the younger, the political active, some education, but little, and central states like Oaxaca, they like the PRD. The poor divides itself between the two, and so we've got some poor with the PRD and some poor with the PRI. And we have congressional elections. Remember, congressional elections are two types, SM, single member districts, and plurality with our two-ballot system. Okay, let's go to the media. During the pre-time, they monopolized the media. And the way they did is they rewarded media that supported them with special favors, such as giving them access. So they said, if you cover us favorably, we'll let you have access to our candidates, to the president, and as such, you guys will be favored. They also subsidized the salaries of those media supporting them. And they also bought advertising from their supporters. So the government would buy advertising from those people who supported them, thereby giving them monetary gain. In the 1990s, the media gained independence when the pre lost power, and also the state media lost power when people had access to the BBC and CNN with mobile devices and other things and computers. And so today the media does criticize the government, and they have a wide range of opinions. So the state-run media has lost its control. Social cleavages. These are three main cleavages, or four. We have the urban-rural cleavage, those that live in the rural areas versus those that live in the cities. Second, we have the mestizos versus the Indian or American Indian issues, and that's typified with the Zapatistas. The Zapatistas are the American Indians in the southern part, and they've rebelled a number of times, the Zapatistas. This is the name of the group that leads these Indian protests. Named after who? Very good, Zapata of the Revolution. We also have a cleavage north and south. Why is there a north-south cleavage?
Economic, yeah.
Very good, it's economic. The north is a lot richer than the south. And we also have the ethnic rebellions, which is typical of the Zapatistas in Chiapas, which is the southernmost, most poor Mexican state. So the one that's on the border of Guatemala is the most poor of all the Mexican states. Okay, turn the page to the next section, citizen-state relations. Of course, we have here, most people participate by being in the patron-client system. So you can put, that's where they get jobs and benefits. We've had numerous protests of people being upset over different things. Examples is the Zapatistas. If you have to give a sample of protests for whatever, it could be ethnic, it could be economic. Zapatistas apply to both. If you go back further, you've got like the protests of students in the 1968 Olympics where they were all gunned down in the plaza. So you've got a number of protests. There have been questions in the past on protests in Mexico. Okay, next is what are socialization agents? Well, in Mexico, it's family, number one. If you're ever in a question of which is the most important, family is most every country. In Mexico, it's also region. So where you are, if you're in the north, you'd most likely support who?
Pan.
All right, the PAN. In your south, you'd support the PRD or the PRI. Also, patron-client system determines who you would support, and another is how active you are in the Catholic Church. People who are more active in the Catholic Church are more conservative than people who are less active. Okay, voting behavior is affected by age, education, and region, as we just talked about. Okay, civil society, next one, is nearly fully functional. Probably the biggest is the church, people participating in the church outside of government control, which is the Catholic Church. Gender issues, there are four things that you want to remember. One is women are severely underrepresented. In Mexico, we have a machismo society. This is that men are strong, men are in charge, but Mexico is making progress. In the 1996 election, they passed a law saying that 30% women had to be on the ballots. So when you do proportional representation, women have to be on the ballots, which has increased women representation. Women are also influential in informal politics, like non-governmental organizations and social movements. So women have a lot of influence directing and working in those. A united women's movement in Mexico is difficult because of class divisions. And so they haven't really got a movement like now in the United States to do that. Okay, how do you recruit elite in Mexico? The Camarilla system is the number one. You can recruit elite in parties. And the people who are the elite called the technicos. Who are the technicos? Those are the people who support technology and modernization. They are educated in U.S. colleges. They'll go to Harvard, Princeton, Yale, or some elite college in the United States, then come back. Who are the opposite of the technicos? Who don't want to reform and don't want to get things up to date?
Traditionalists.
The dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs.
The dinosaurs, okay? People don't want reform. All right, political change. There are 3 events you need to remember. First of all, the 1988 presidential election. This was the turning point. This showed that the election was obviously containing fraud. So reforms had to be made. Then we have 1994, the crisis year, for 4 things. First, the Zapatista rebellion. The PRI tried to get them to be quiet by giving them money, subsidizing them. Second, the Colosio assassination. Their chosen successor was gunned down right during the campaign. And so the PRI lost the control of the succession because they got a loose cannon in there. We also have number 3 is the PRI scandals. There were scandals within the PRI. We have the President Salinas' brother, Raul, doing all sorts of things, taking money, and this discredited the PRI. People didn't want to vote for it. And the last is the economic meltdown where the economy of Mexico just collapsed. All 4 of these things in 1994 will lead to reform. And reform came in the form of the Federal Election Agency, which made elections independent of the PRI, and as soon as the PRI was not counting votes, the PRI lost. Funny thing. This gave all people, all parties equal access to the media, and ordinary citizens ran the polls, and all elections were monitored by outside people who came in. And so lo and behold, in 2000, the PRI lost. So that's huge political change. You've got to talk about the 90s and that change if you're going to talk about political change. Yes, Mohan.
What's the organization called that counts the votes again?
It's called the Federal Elections Agency, or the IFE, whatever it is in Spanish. I don't know how that works, but it's basically the National Election Agency, IFE. Okay, let's go to economic change. The 1980s marked the Mexican miracle. This is where Mexico came from the depression, the recession, and oil prices collapsing in the early 80s. And we go back and forth from Technico to Dinosaur, all this. Mr. Madrid, who was the president of Mexico in the 80s, made market reforms, moving to structural adjustment. He cut government spending, he reduced the debt, he privatized parastatals, and encouraged foreign investment, all which made Mexico boom. And so Mexico comes out of an economic funk to become what we call the Mexican miracle. Okay? And all that's part of economic change. Okay, let's go to globalization. We have foreign direct investment in structural adjustment. They're trying to meet the world debt, encourage foreign investment, and they do that by two things. First, they join the World Trade Organization, which cuts down on barriers to trade. They also signed the NAFTA treaty with the United States and Canada. And with that, they establish, as part of NAFTA, these maquiladores, which encourage foreign investment. And also tending to globalize the economy is something that they really don't want, and that's the drug wars, because drugs are coming in, going out of Mexico, and creating globalization, but really not in a good form. Okay, turn the page to our last page. And public policy issues in Mexico. You have the impact of globalization, which is a big issue, and what NAFTA has been doing. Who doesn't like globalization and NAFTA? All right, the poor in the South. This has not really helped them that much. And with that, this imbalance in wealth, what does that cause as another public policy issue?
No, everybody goes to the north.
Right. You have this internal migration. And we're not talking just coming to the United States. We're talking people from the South moving to the north, where there are factories and work opportunities, and the standard of living is a lot higher and more beneficial to them. So you've got this south to north migration. Also south to city or rural to city migration, where there are more jobs. So that's another public policy issue. We also have issues dealing with human rights, with police abuse and other things that go on because of the drug trade. We also have corruption, which is a huge public policy issue, which goes with the Camarilla system. We also have issues with environment. The environment takes a back seat to other things, development, and so Mexico has that issue. Okay, public policy making process. Who sets the agenda in Mexico?
President.
All right, the president. Okay. President is the focal point of setting agendas. Okay, input. Where does input come in? Okay. Input comes from corporatism too. It's government influenced interest groups. So elite interest groups have input, like labor groups, parties have input, but input is controlled by the government through corporatism, just like it is in Great Britain. Formation, who are the players in formation of public policy?
legislative branch and the president.
All right, Congress and the President. President being the foremost, Congress being a up-and-coming partner in that. Okay? Who implements?
Bureaucracy.
All right, bureaucracy. And we all know the problems with that. Not trained, personal interest first. Who evaluates policy in Mexico? All right, media is a good one. Elections also evaluate policy and tell what the people are thinking. And to some extent, more lately, the judiciary can evaluate policy. But they're not a full player yet. Media and elections are the biggest. Okay, military. In Mexico, is military next?
Yes.
All right, military has been taken out of politics. How has Mexico been able to take the military out of politics?
They used to pay off like generals.
All right, they used to move them out of their camarilla and give them monetary awards versus the political power rewards that they do in other South American or Central American countries. So they rotated generals, removing from camarilla systems. The president traded favors with officers, giving them economic power so that they would give up their political power. The results have been what has happened to the military in trying to gain more economic power.
They
Try to work with the
All right,
consultants.
now they're tied to the drug cartels. So these military people are taking money from the drug cartels. So that's been an unintended consequence here. So they took them out of politics, but now they're in economic issues, which makes it difficult. Comparisons and indexes. Right now, Mexico is making a dual transition. They're going from a socialist economy to a market economy. They're moving on that track. They're also moving from a authoritarian rule of the PRI to a more democratic rule. So they're moving on both of those levels into a new Mexico.
So when you say Democrat, do you mean PRD or just Democrat?
They're
Democratic?
going from a PRI-controlled and dominated political system to an open system now that any party could win.
Okay.
So they're moving across there from an authoritarian to a democratic. Now, before they had an illiberal democracy because we had elections, but they were not fair and free. So now they're moving from an illiberal to a liberal democracy. And they're somewhere in between there. And they're also moving from a socialist economy to a free market more economy with fewer barriers. Okay. That should do it, I think. Are there any questions you have on Mexico?
Yeah, so I just kind of want to touch back on the Camarilla system.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the clear definition of it? What do they do again? I kind of.
Camarilla is the Mexican version of the patron-client system.
Okay.